But I remember Mother being very sad for a while and me not understanding what the hell was going on. She died actually about the same time, maybe a little bit after. No, it would be a little bit, oh, yeah, a little bit after I'd had my operation. I come down, when I was about 3 years old, come down with a case of empyema, which is infection of the lining of the lung. For short, they called it pneumonia, but it wasn't pneumonia. It was an infection of the lung lining, not the lung itself. And that's one of the early memories that I had. I think I was about 3 years old at the time. I was operated on in St. John's Hospital in Tulsa. And I remember the operation because of the location of the operation and the state of development of euthanasia. Not euthanasia, but what is it?
Anesthetic?
It's of anesthetics, yeah. They didn't feel that they could deliver the medication in my lung area and keep me breathing. So anyway, they couldn't give me any anesthetic, and I remembered I was laying there on my stomach, and they're operating on me, and Dad was beside me holding my hand and helping him hold me down. And it was really burned a lot. That's how I remember feeling them. I remember the recovery afterward. The nurses would have mechanical cars, automobiles, that they'd run out in the hall outside my room, trying to cheer me up. And I remember that all very well, so I guess it served its purpose. It cheered me up because I remembered it. And then I guess I recovered. I still have a big scar on the back, and it's always a conversation piece in the gym.
You tell stories about it?
Huh?
You tell stories about that?
Was I worried about it?
Do you make up stories about your scar?
Oh yeah, about my scar. I used to tell people I got stabbed in Jay, Oklahoma, in the bar. Yeah. Anyway, that was always provided a story. That brings us up to about 32 or 3. We lived to 14, 24. Directly after we were born, the Depression started. I was born September 9th, 1929. The Depression started in October. And I always like to say that my parents and everybody blamed me for the Depression. And that was another stellar year, the coldest year of Tulsa. We recorded the coldest winter and most extended winter that they ever had in Tulsa. It got down to 16 below zero.
Wow.
In January of that year. And it was a long extended winter season. And we haven't had one that severe yet again. I don't know how much snow we had. I'm sure we had plenty of snow if it was that cold. And it lasted for a long time. But the Depression was going. And it made things especially tough on people who all of a sudden found themselves out of work. But Dad was providing the commodity that everybody bought. Everybody bought bread. That was one of the last things they stopped buying if they didn't have any money. And they didn't waste any bread. They, at the time making the bread, they took the bread out one day, and the next day when they bring the bread out the next day, they picked up what was left and sold that as day-old bread. We had the bakery. It got me a mosquito.
I got what? Actually, okay, so we're talking about the bakery during the Depression.
During the Depression, we had that place where we sold the day-old bread, and we sold out pretty well. That we priced it at about half price of what we sold. Say the fresh bread. It didn't have preservatives then that they do now, so the bread did not last as long as it does now. Now you can use bread 2 weeks after it comes out, wrapped in the bag, in the sack, and the wrapping. Dad also, his bread was sliced and packaged, sealed with in packages that air couldn't get to it, so it helped them preserve them that way. I remember the interior of the bakery very well. It all started with flour storage up on the second floor of the bakery. We had a freight elevator. We took the heavy stuff up to the second floor, and it was extra strong construction, more like a warehouse than anything else. Stored the flour in 100-pound sacks on pallets in the big room upstairs. It was carried into the mixers, which is a big tub, size of a large bathtub, really.
Wow.
They put water and flour in that, and some oil, and that advertised that the bread was made with milk and honey. I don't know if any of the bread ever saw any milk or honey, but that's what he advertised. Down-to-off bread made with milk and honey.
Grandpa, what was it like growing up in the Depression?
Well, I can only tell you from a baker's son's perspective. We were relatively prosperous. I never recall ever having any money in my pocket, but we always had good shoes and we had nice clothes. Mother saw to that for sure. We lived at 1424 South Indianapolis most of the time. That's near the corner of 15th and Harvard. 2 doors over from Eastside Christian Church. And next door to Marshall Owens Hudson. Wonder what happened to him.
To your friend growing up?
He was the only child of a couple there. And I didn't. The only thing I remember is he had glasses. He was a little bit of an older kid. You don't remember anything more about that. But you asked the question, what was it like growing up in the Depression?
Yeah.
I was relatively protected there.
You don't remember your parents ever being stressed out about it?
Well, yeah, but they talked about it. Dad recalls that he recalls people coming up to him and wanting a job. And one time a guy said, "See that guy there, Mr. Mueller?" And Dad said, "Yeah." I said, I'll do his job for $5 a week less than you're paying him." And he just shook his head. That's something you just can't do.
Mm-hmm.
But he was loyal to his employees, and they were to him also. did have some problem with union organization there. Dad's, and they had a call to the union organizers called a strike. And the shop people, I think it was just the shop people, maybe the drivers, I don't know, struck. And I don't think it was an extended thing, but due to threats, I remember Dad bought him a little makeshift 25 caliber, 32 caliber, 25 caliber pistol. It looked like it was all pressed together. He had it up until the time he died. More about that later, maybe. But one time, Dad and my grandfather were in the garage at the bakery. I don't know what was going on, but one of the strikers called Dad a son of a bitch, and Dad decked the guy with his fist, and Grandpa came up and started kicking him.
Oh my goodness.
And Grandpa was a little guy, about 5 feet tall, 5'1".
Wow.
And anyway, I think Grandpa got a citation for something, assault and battery or something like that.
How old was the man that they beat up?
The man was a young guy.
Mm.
I'm sure he's in the 20s or 30s. But things were inflamed. I have in my possession a copy of the union contract, or the copy of the union contract that Dad has. It was done by Joe Houston in Tulsa.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't at all onerous. I have a copy of it, and I'll have to find that thing again, put it in a frame. But it wasn't at all onerous to my view now.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a matter of, independence. A business owner doesn't like to have somebody telling him how to run his business.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, guys that are competing against other people out of work, get jobs, and to keep them, it was, it's very difficult for everybody. Also, Dad got interested, like so many people in Oklahoma, even though they weren't in the business, they wanted to get into it. They heard about all this wealth and stuff, and they took shares of wells that were being drilled.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad got some leases and took an interest in some wells. And most of them were dry, but he had some of them that were productive. Had some deep stuff that was almost 15,000 feet deep.
Is that very deep?
In Grady County, I think it was.
Was 15,000 feet very deep back then?
Yeah, it was quite deep.
Okay.
That would have been probably in the Chitwood field in Grady County. Anyway, that was exciting for Dad and for us. Sometimes he'd take the boys out on a weekend, take us out with him to visit the rig on a Saturday or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't get up on the rig. We played around below and kept our nose out of trouble with. But that was all exciting. We lived in St. Francis Parish by about a matter of half a block.
Mm-hmm.
Parish line went down 15th Street and west of 15th Street was, south of 15th Street was Christ the King Parish, and north of 15th Street was St. Francis Parish. And we were in St. Francis Parish, but because it was 15th Street was on the road to the bakery that we had to take to the bakery every day. Dad could take us drop us off to school at Marquette in the morning, and that was about 2 miles. Later we walked it frequently both ways, especially coming home. Dad could most always take us before work, since school took up at 8 o'clock. But at evening, afternoon, we got off at 3 o'clock, and sometimes we walked home.
What kind of car did your dad drive?
Dad was, most of the time I remember, he was driving a 37 Ford Coupe. And Mother and the family had a 4-door Pontiac. And Dad, hey, there goes a couple of geese, Canadian geese. And where is this being, what's the name of the town this is nearby?
Stockbridge. Stockbridge. Stockbridge.
Stockbridge? Stockbridge. Stockbridge, Connecticut. Yeah, Connecticut. Massachusetts, excuse me.
It's okay.
Let me see, where was I?
Talking about cars.
High school, yeah. Perry says, anyway, we got to go to Marquette School, and we...
Is that all boys?
Well, we had 3 boys.
At the school?
Yeah, at the school at one time. Tom would have been in the 1st grade, and I was in this, well, most of the time I was, although I had pneumonia when I was 3 years old, that had all been all recovered, and I started school at the regular time. And so did Tom, and so did Dick, but Tom, he caught some scarlet fever, I think it was, and had to stay in bed for a long time, and he got put back a year. So he was always bigger and older than the other kids in his class, so that had an advantage athletically and from a leadership position. He was always a leader, and he was a good athlete. And my little brother Dick, sometime in the early years of school, he got held back. He was, I don't know, he may have been upsettable for a while there. I don't know how you'd describe it, how they would describe it in the old days, but anyway, he went to Betty Rombo School, which was a private school on 18th Street. Oh, near south of 18th, west of 18th and Madison, a couple of blocks. But anyway, after a couple of years of that, he got back into Marquette School, but a year behind. When I was in school, I was always 3 years ahead of Dick, and 1 year behind Tom, although I was at two years on spread on our birth ages. And Tom was the smarter by far of all 3 of us.
Do you have better grades?
Better grades and like to read more. I read a lot when I was a little kid. For instance, I read about a book about the Lewis and Clark expedition when I was in the 3rd grade. It must not have been a very difficult book because I did read it. It was probably written for kids, although I'm not sure. Growing up, I liked to read in the summer. I read books about birds and stuff like that.
Have you always loved
Books
birds?
about scouting. Yeah, I've been kind of ape on birds forever, it seemed like.
Were there lots of nice birds in Tulsa?
Is it what?
Were there birds in Tulsa that you liked looking at?
Well, yeah, all of them, all the local birds, and of course, when we would go up to the cabin up in Spavinaw. My dad got a cabin up in on Spavinaw Creek above Spavinaw Lake, and which I have now. But we were spent a whole lot of time in the summers up there with Mother, and sometimes Dad would come up on the weekends too. But we'd spend a good part of the summer there at Spavinaw on the creek.
How did the Ozark Club get started?
Well, it was started as a hunting club by some people in Tulsa.
Hunting for what?
Hunting deer and stuff like that. But by the time that I came around, the deer had been pretty well obliterated. And when I was raised, there was very few deer in Oklahoma, and seeing one was a milestone event. I think whatever deer they were got eaten pretty quickly then, especially during the Depression. Now, a lot of that country had been settled by little farms, and I know it used to be that we'd walk around hiking in the woods and sometimes find remains of an old house, a foundation or something, like a rock foundation of a house.
Mm-hmm.
And the area had been originally settled by Cherokee Indians.
Mm-hmm.
In the middle of the early first half of the 19th century, in the 1800s. But there were a lot of Cherokee Indians around there then, and there still are. Oh yeah, Tulsa. After the Ozark Club was established there, that the creek became known as a possibility for good fresh water. Tulsa had a bad water supply. They were taking water from the Arkansas River, and that was not the best water. It's downstream from Great Salt Plains Reservoir, which has a bunch of salt coming in, and natural salt from salt that had been leaching out of the earth, and the Arkansas River, especially when the river was running low, had a high salt, pretty high salt content. It's wasn't like ocean brine, but it was, just not a game fish type water.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it was, during spring runoff, it was, it wasn't salty, but most of the time there was some salt in it, especially during droughts. A lot of times there wasn't any water on the surface at all. You had to dig down to get any of the water in the valley of the Arkansas. But anyway, Tulsa had designed and built a dam at the town of Spavinaw over the Spavinaw Creek, and the water, the upper end of the water on the front on the upper end of the lake went up to within about a mile of the Ozark Club. So it was a good place. They took advantage of it. In addition to the creek fishing, they had lake fishing. And members of the Ozark Club had boathouses built on the upper end of Spavinaw Lake, and you can still see some of them foundation for them. You can see that around sometimes. Anyway, Tulsa was gravitied. It's about 80 feet higher than Tulsa, I think, and the gravity was built in such a way that the water gravitated in concrete pipe all the way to Tulsa. Later on, they started pumping it to get more water out of there quicker. And later on, in the 50s, they built Ouachita Dam, which was downstream from the town of Ouachita. Oklahoma, which is on the banks of the upper Spavinaw Creek, and then they use the Spavinaw Creek above the Uchi Lake above Spavinaw Lake as an additional water supply, and during the spring freshets, be able to catch more water for use during the summertime. And it's worked quite well, although they still have to supply us also with water from some of the other rivers, Grand River, for instance. And let me see, where were we then? Grade school, I guess. So.
Mm-hmm. At Marquette.
I went to the grade school at Marquette School. And we spent a lot of time on the playground. We boys spent a lot of time riding, being punished for talking in class or raising heck, and having to write the word silence 500 times, or I shall be quiet 500 times, or I shall pay more attention to good manners 250 times, or something like, have these different tasks. And I always blame my bad handwriting on practice of having to write so many tasks. That's what we call it, a task. That was the punishment that they gave for
Misbehavior.
malpractices.
Grandpa, it's raining a little bit. Let's go inside.
Is it raining?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mary Virginia?
One moment.
I thought we talked about her.
We didn't really talk about it that much, though. We talked about your scar. We talked
didn't.
about it a couple times, actually.
Talked about the scar, my empyema, and my operation. And then we talked about
Where did we land yesterday?
Mary Virginia was our younger sister. Is it going?
Yeah.
Mary Virginia was our younger sister. She was born in 34, I think.
34?
I think. And she died when she was a couple years old. She had some sort of a birth defect. And the only thing I really remember about her is how sad Mother was, and she was going around crying all the time, and everybody was all upset. And I never did find out what the ailment was that she had, or how it worked out. I should have asked that before Mother died. But let me see. Then I talked about Dick and my brother Tom. What did I talk about my brother Tom?
You're talking about Tom, how Tom was really smart and good at sports.
Yeah, Tom was a smarter guy. And he was interested in reading. And I remember one time when I was 13 years old, Dad and I had gone out in the 37 Ford quail hunting on Thanksgiving afternoon. Just Dad and I. And we went out to an old place that was near 41st and Harvard, west of 41st and Harvard. And that was past the edge of town. We went out there quail hunting, and we had our setter dog, English setter Bert, there. And Dad let me drive the car coming back, and I was going down 41st Street, and, probably at 41st and Birmingham, going toward 41st and Lewis, and going down a hill, and I think the brakes locked. I'm not sure, but that's what we surmised. The brakes locked. We had Ford had mechanical brakes rather than hydraulic brakes, and the car ended up turning over. And I remember that event turning over. We ended up on the side, I think, or maybe it was right side up. I don't know. But Dad got out, and I noticed that Dad's head was bleeding
Oh.
on the top of his head. And at those days, the windshield wipers, they had a control knob near the ceiling, in front of the ceiling on the car. Each side had one for each windshield wiper on its side. And this control knob, it had the knob was off of it, and it was just a little screw sticking out. And Dad, bouncing around the car, hit that with his head and gouged out his scalp.
Ugh.
So we got out of the car and we rode into the hospital. We left Bert in the back of the car. I remember him hollering, barking when we were rolling over. Left him in the back of the car. And got a ride into town, and I guess Dad got a record, told the wrecker out to get it, make sure the car was okay. I don't know how we got it back to the shop. I don't know how that happened. But anyway, I went in with Dad, and Dad said to call Mother. So I got to the phone, and I did call Mother, telephone number 64685. And
Wow.
so I said, Dad, she said, Joe Fred, where are you? And I said, well, I'm at the hospital. What are you doing there? I said, well, Dad wanted me to call you and tell you to come pick us up. What are you doing at the hospital? And I said, well, the car had a wreck. We rolled it over. No, I didn't. Mother didn't answer the phone. Tom did. My brother Tom did.
Okay.
He was laying on the sofa in the living room reading.
Mm-hmm.
And he answered the phone. And Mother said, well, who was that? And he came down, sat down, and started reading again. He said, well, that's Joe Fred. And he said, where was Joe Fred? And he says, it's at the hospital. And he said, well, what was he doing at the hospital? Well, Dad wants us to come pick him up. And he was going to sit there and read and finish up his story before he came to the hospital and told Mother, apparently. So she interrupted his story real quickly, and she came down there and picked us up at the hospital.
Happened to Bert.
Well, Bert was okay.
Yeah. Did you guys always have English setters growing up?
Well, that was the only English setter we had, I think.
Mm.
He was a pretty good bird dog. He couldn't swim any good, though. I remember one time he couldn't swim at all. He tried to, instead of keeping his paws out of the water, he'd get his paws above the water.
Sounds like
flailing
Vern.
around.
That's how Vern
You
swims.
just never did. Is that how Vern swims?
Yeah. A lot of up and down movements.
But one time up in Spavinaw, we're at the Ozark Club, we were going out on the creek in our canoe, and God, we had, I think all 5 of us were in the damn canoe at the same time. Dad and Mom were paddling, and Tom and I were in there. I don't know if Dickie was in there or not. I guess he was. And Bert was over on the side barking and hollering, and he couldn't stand it, and he jumped in the creek and wanted to come over to us in the canoe. And it looked like he was floundering. So Tom jumped out of the canoe to go get Bert, and in so doing that the canoe turned over. So we all ended up in the water. And Mother was flailing around. watching out for us kids, and Mother was flailing around, and we had to tell her that she could stand up in the water. And so she finally did, and we found out we were laughing at her, and she didn't like that. So we all got in and got back to the house, and Mother had on a wristwatch. And in those days, wristwatches were never waterproof.
Mm-hmm.
And she ruined the wristwatch. We tried to put it in some oil, but it didn't work very well. I guess we should have put it in isopropyl alcohol or something like that, and then put some oil in it
Rice.
and let it drain. But anyway, that's how that happened with a great wristwatch. And funny thing about it, about 20 years later, we'd moved back to Tulsa from Marie and the family, and me had moved back to Tulsa from Wyoming, and we had Annie and Freddie was a little baby in diapers. And again, Mother was up the cabin with us. Freddie was there in his diapers, and Mother and I were going up the canoe, up the creek in a canoe again, and we got up on the swift water on the first rapids above the clubhouse grounds, and the water was kind of swift and currents, and we weren't very well balancing. We had too many people in the canoe again. It turned over, and we turned over, and I grabbed Freddie by the diapers and held him up. He wasn't underwater any, but he was hollering, and I got him spluttering around. I got him to shore, and Marie was watching out for Mother, and Mother was flopping around, and Marie was trying to get underneath her. She couldn't pull us, didn't know the rescue techniques, but she dove underneath Mother and pushed her towards the shore. And finally, after all the floundering around, everybody got saved, the canoe was saved, and everything was okay. She had worn a non-waterproof watch again. And that one got soaked and ended up getting ruined, so she ruined 2 watches on the creek.
In
Spavanoff Creek, yeah.
Grandpa, can you tell me what it was like building the cabin that you built with your family that you now have?
We didn't build it.
Oh.
Dad got it. I still have the deed for sale.
Okay.
From a guy named Graham, who was, I think, water superintendent for Tulsa at one time. At least he was, I don't know what sort of government we had then. I was just a kid. But bought it from him, and we had to get a affidavit from his daughter, because he was apparently a little senile by the time that we bought the cabin from him. It was either in the late 30s, somewhere in the late 30s, maybe 38, something like that, that we bought the cabin. And Dad, he pretty well redid the inside of the cabin. He set up, he had built a little addition for the kitchen, and let me see, he had knotty pine paneling throughout the cabin on the interior. It's kind of a cheap knotty pine, but it was knotty pine. It's been there for 80 years now.
Wow.
Or 70 years. And I still have the affidavit that the Mr. Graham's daughter had signed for the house for the cabin, so that the title could pass to us.
Mm-hmm.
And well, that's about it for that. How we got the cabin.
Okay.
Oh yeah, Dad had a mechanic he had at the bakery then, a guy named Dan Lynch.
Mm-hmm.
He was in charge of most of the mechanical maintenance and repairs of the machinery in the bakery, and about 20 trucks that Dad had in his fleet of delivery vehicles.
So how old were you when you guys acquired the cabin?
I think I was about 8 or 9.
Did you love it? What?
Oh yeah, we spent a good part of summer there, it seemed like.
Yeah.
All the roads going into Spavinaw were gravel,
Mm-hmm.
and well, all the roads within any distance at all from Spavinaw was gravel. In fact, there's a gravel road from Salina to Spavinaw, and on to Jay. It was all gravel roads then. I remember Mother would drive pretty fast. Sometimes she'd go up on Friday morning or Thursday, and Dad would come up on Saturday or Friday evening. My mother used to drive pretty fast. I recall her going on those gravel roads at 70 miles an hour, and I thought that was really wild. I didn't have any idea of any danger. I hadn't rolled over the car yet, I don't think. It was well before I rolled my first car myself.
Did you go up there when you turned 16? Would you drive out there?
Did I drive up there then? No,
No.
they wouldn't let me do that.
Okay.
But I did. Well, I didn't roll over a car. I rolled that car when I was 13, I said. Then I rolled another car with my dad in it again. Just my dad and me. I rolled the car twice, and both times my father was in it. We'd been over on the Illinois River fishing. We rented a boat, and I think the Flint Creek, where Flint Creek went into the Illinois River and floated down to a bridge down there. And Dad and I were coming back on a summer afternoon. It was hot, and the road was a oiled road. It wasn't really hard cement paved, but it was a oiled road. And all of a sudden we had a thunderstorm come up and rained. It rained hard. That was Highway 33, I think. It was Highway 33. And all of a sudden I was skidding on the road, and I went down the road to the bar pit on the left-hand side of the road and rolled over and got out of there, and the people saw us and they stopped and pulled us out. The car was right side up. I saw a tow truck go by and asked him to pull us out, and they did. Gave him $10. And Dad had hailed down somebody, and he asked him to take him home. He said, "Joe, you take care of it." Meaning, get the car back to town. So
Yeah.
I got the car pulled out when I saw this tow truck going by, and drove the car back into town. I never did get a citation or anything like that. I wanted to get it out of there so I wouldn't get a citation, because if you're off in the side of the road attracting a crowd, you get a citation for improper procedures or something. So that's all the only times I've turned over canoes, and with dogs and babies, and turned over cars with my father.
I think Carolyn has a question.
I have a question.
What's that?
What was it like growing up in World War II?
I already
World
asked that
War II.
question.
Oh, sorry.
Well,
Depression.
I don't know what
World War II, not the Depression.
Oh, my bad.
I said before, but most of the war was fought after Dad had, most of the U.S. war was fought after Dad had the bakery. He had to get rid of the bakery in the early part of the war because it was impossible for him to get skilled people, because the skilled people that are two-thirds smart would get a job in one of the defense plants around there, either at the bomber plant out where the airport is now, or at Oklahoma Ordnance Works, which is outside of Pryor, where they had a facility that made gunpowder and loaded it into loaded ammunition there. I recall, other than that, there's always seemed like they always having. I didn't know of anybody who was in fighting. The family did, of course. There was always a whole lot of war bond sales. The war was being financed by selling war bonds, government bonds to citizens.
Mm-hmm.
And they always having big war bond rallies out, say, for instance, out of Skelly Field and on TU's campus. And there's a lot of money raising things like that. There's rationing too, and Dad had some rationing in the bakery. They rationed sugar and fat, and he could only make as much bread, not bread, well, bread for a while, and then cookies later on, as he had sugar and fat to put in making the dough. He could get flour okay, I guess. But anyway, there's rationing, and I did know that Dad had him a C card for gasoline, which was unlimited. Regular citizen had an A card. They got, I think, 4 gallons a week or 8 gallons a week, something like that. But Dad had a C, so it was unlimited use for business. And I don't know if he touched on that at all or anything like that.
So you were 17 when the war was over, right?
17, war was over in 45, and I was born in 29, so I've been 16, I guess.
16. Do you remember where you were when you found out the war was over?
Yeah, I think I was downtown. No, when the war started, I was downtown. I'd gone to a movie by myself, took the bus downtown, went to the movie, and the Tulsa World or the Tribune had issued an extra edition, and they were selling newspapers on the streets that says Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And that was a big event. When the war was over, I don't recall that. Of course, I do recall big celebrations. When the war was over, I was going to Cassia Hall. And I didn't remember too much about the war being over. I knew the war was going to be over soon, because of the way things were going. Of course, we had both war being over in Europe and then the war being over in the Pacific. There were two different events. So when it was over in Europe, it was just a matter of more time till it would be over in the Pacific, and it was.
Grandpa, what was it like growing up as a Catholic in Oklahoma?
I didn't know much difference. I do remember one time out in the schoolyard, we're playing at recess or something. Some guys hollered out of the car, "Don't pay no attention to them nuns." That was all I heard.
Okay.
And also remember the Temple of Israel at that time